Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today, we now enter into the second half of What If Captain America Was in Jojo's Bizarre Adventures, Dio's Revenge, Part 3. As always, if you're a fan of the channel and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Before we get started with this series, there are some things I do want to mention. First, due to the length of Stardust Crusaders and how long it is as a series, if I tried to go into detail about every little event that takes place, we would have a very long series on our hand, and I do like to try to keep things compressed for time. So I do want to explain beforehand as you listen to this series, a lot of events will be summarized, although I will give as best as I can descriptions of the summaries that are taking place. Now, when it comes to the big battles or the key points of the series, then I will take time in the video and dedicate portions of it to that particular moment. But for all the fights that you do have in JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, I'm mainly going to summarize them, but also explain where the differences come in. And hopefully this can be done in a way that you can enjoy the series, but that it's not too time consuming. Since I have 48 episodes to get through, I've decided to break them up into 4 videos that each cover about 12 episodes worth of the event that happened. This is just going to be a test run of that, starting with this series, and we start with part 3 that covers the first 12 episodes of the 48 of Stardust Crusaders. I did want to tell you this beforehand, just so that you'll know of the type of storytelling that I'm going for with this series, and I do hope that you will appreciate it, as well as everything else that we have coming out on the channel. But anyway, without further ado, let's begin today's story. As always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. As we begin our story, let's do a recap of how we got to the events of this timeline. Following World War II, Captain America, along with his allies, Joseph Joestar, Caesar Zappelli, their master, Lisa, Bucky Barnes, Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, as well as members of the elite task force known as the Howling Commandos, would have successfully defeated the Red Skull and his Hydra forces, along with the Axis powers, as well as the Pillar Men, during the events of World War II in Captain America: The First Avenger. In this timeline, because Captain America had been able to survive and was not frozen in the Arctic, the Tesseract was recovered and was held by the Allied forces, most notably under the protection of the new organization formed by Peggy Carter along with her husband Steve Rogers, that being the organization known as S.H.I.E.L.D. Because of this timeline, Captain America, with his influence, would not allow for Hydra agents to seep into the new agency. Thus, in this timeline of events, Hydra would not be able to hide within S.H.I.E.L.D., but instead, whatever remained of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s forces would have driven Hydra into the shadows, where they would remain, hoping once again to strike. In this timeline, Caesar Zappelli, along with Bucky Barnes, also survived the events as well. Bucky never becomes the Winter Soldier, and Caesar survives and lives on training under his master Lisa, and Joseph would still go on to marry Susie Q, and they would go on to have a family of their own. The events of the Jojo's portion of this story would remain the same also, up until the events of Part 2. In 1983, Dio, a vampiric enemy of the Joestar family, starting with Jonathan Joestar, would emerge from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, looking for revenge against the Joestars for what he had suffered almost 100 years ago. Having manifested his own stand, and having taken the body of his sworn enemy in Jonathan, stands would begin to emerge from all of the descendants of the Joestar family, from Joseph Joestar to Holly, his daughter, as well as his grandson, Jotaro Kujo. However, they would not be the only ones who would manage to gain their stands. Captain America, Steve Rogers, would have also gained a stand of his own. How this would have been possible in this universe is actually from what had taken place following the events of Part 2. As Steve was recovering in Venice along with Joseph as the two of them were being cared for by Susie Q, Steve needed a blood transfusion. Not knowing where to go, Joseph would offer his immediately, and as such, some of the Joestar blood now ran through the veins of Steve Rogers. As such, he manifested his own stand. It started when his shield that he was most famed for using would seemingly disappear before he felt a power emerge from within himself. This was Steve Rogers' stand, known as Blue Liberty. The powers of his stand were connected to the super soldier serum, along with the Joestar blood that ran within him. Whenever Captain America wanted to manifest his stand, it came in two forms. First, he could summon a stand shield. It was basically his ordinary shield, only it was created out of pure energy. He could summon it consciously at will, not only to either of his arms, but he could form the shield around his entire body, using it like that of a defensive protection. The second usage for his stand was that of the actual humanoid stand itself, Blue Liberty. However, for Captain America to summon Blue Liberty, it came at a cost. Whenever he used his stand, Captain America would be drained of the super soldier serum. While he would retain his youthful vigor and form, he would not have the superhuman strength to go along with it. As a result, to use the stand, Captain America would still be vulnerable in the process. Not too long after, Joseph would give a call to Steve, explaining to him about the stands, as he had been doing research of his own during the time, along with a new ally he had made along the way, in Avdol. The three would discuss more about the situation at hand. Captain America, along with S.H.I.E.L.D., would be made aware of the enemy known as Dio. While S.H.I.E.L.D. wanted to take precautions in dealing with such a threat, Avdol would warn that it would be in their best interest not to go after Dio directly, as just sending ordinary soldiers to fight against Dio might only result in their deaths. Not too long after, Joseph would learn that his grandson, Jotaro, had also manifested a stand of his own. The three would make the trip over to Japan, where they would meet with Jotaro, who was willingly keeping himself in prison, believing that he had been possessed by some type of cursed spirit. However, once he was confronted by his grandfather, his friend Avdol, and the famed Captain America, of whom he knew much about, as he was close to the Joestar family, they would explain that he instead had a stand that had manifested. Jotaro would then learn of the history of the Joestar family, as well as their dealings with Dio. Around the time, they would still suffer an attack from an assassin, Kokoyoin, who had been under the influence of Dio. Kokoyoin used a stand known as Emerald Green, which was fluid in its motion and movement. However, once they were able to free him from the possession of Dio, he was able to turn over to the side of good and offered his services in helping to deal with the threat. Avdol mentioned that he also had a friend that could potentially help them, although he was all the way in Egypt at the moment, so they wouldn't be able to see him for a while. Using Joseph's stand, Hermit Purple, they were able to discover the location of Dio, which, surprisingly enough, was actually in Cairo, Egypt. However, they would have to make the trip to Egypt in the first place, in order to find and kill him once and for all. The situation would only go from bad to worse, as Holly would fall to an illness, this illness actually being the emergence of her own stand. However, since she did not have training like the others, her body was not strong enough to withstand and hold it, meaning that if they could not defeat Dio within an allotted amount of time, that being 50 days, Holly would unfortunately die. The group, now knowing what they needed to do, would make the preparations known. With backing from S.H.I.E.L.D., they would be able to get to Egypt rather quickly. However, little did they know that Dio would already be aware of their actions, and he would already have his forces in motion, working to try to stop them every step of the way. They would be bombarded at every turn, facing off against various assassins sent by Dio. Among them would be none other than Polnareff, an assassin who was sent from France. His stand, Silver Chariot, proved to be a rather admirable foe, more so than any of the others were expecting. Captain America would face off against Polnareff, Silver Chariot versus Blue Liberty, the Shield versus the Rapier. Captain America's defense, as well as his years of military training, actually proved to be a benefit with his stand, as he was able to dispatch of the swordsmen, although it did not come without its fair share of difficulty. However, thankfully, Polnareff was able to see the true cause of his suffering. The only reason that Polnareff had joined with Dio was because he was promised that he would get the chance to find the person who had attacked and killed his younger sister. However, learning that the one responsible was more than likely working under the orders of Dio, Polnareff committed himself to joining with the team, and together, the group of 6 would continue on their journey to Egypt. The team along the way would have to deal with more than their own fair share of difficulties, fighting with enemy stand units who ranged with various degrees of their own deep and mysterious powers, whether that be Captain Tennille and his stand, Dark Blue Moon, who was capable of using it underwater, or fighting against a giant gorilla who had somehow managed to form a stand of his own. To say that the battles could be overwhelming would be an understatement. However, the group were able to work together, and before long, they had made it almost to the halfway point of where they needed to go, eventually arriving to India. While there, the group would encounter 2 of Dio's most powerful assassins, that being in the gunslinger Whole Horse, along with his partner, Jagiel. The 2 would play on Polnareff's insecurities. As a result, they were able to trap him in a situation where they could pick him off and take him out. However, in order to avoid his death, Avdol would arrive and save Polnareff, pushing him out of the way. However, in the process, it would seem as though he had been killed, as the bullet used by Whole Horse in his stand, that takes the form of a gun, had seemingly managed to strike him in the forehead, killing him instantly. In the meanwhile, Jagiel would continue to provoke Polnareff, enticing him to want to fight recklessly and wanting to catch him off guard. However, Steve would talk to Polnareff, calming him down, reminding him that by working as a team, it wasn't only his life that was at risk, but all of theirs. And it was only by them working together that they would be able to stand a chance and stop their enemies. As such, they would eventually be able to defeat Jagiel, killing him before he would have a chance to flee. The group would bury Avdol, mourning their losses before they continued on. Along the way, the group would be joined by a young girl named Nana, who was a runaway. She had become attached to the group to some extent. However, all the same, they knew that they couldn't just leave her to her own devices. They would work together to be able to get her somewhere safe, allowing her to go home, before they would continue on with their journey. As they continued on, they would come into conflict with one known as the Empress. The Empress, using her abilities and attempting to influence the mind of a doctor to try to murder Joseph Joestar. However, Joseph was quick on his feet, being able to get the best of the Empress. However, he would find himself in a bit of a predicament, as the Empress's stand was like a parasite that became attached to his body. It would take Joseph using his stand, Hermit Purple, along with his years of training in Haman, to be able to defeat and destroy the enemy once and for all. Thankfully, once the others were made aware of the situation, they would be able to come to his defense. Before long, the group would eventually make their way to Pakistan, believing that they could find some refuge there while they waited in wanting to plan out their next move, as they continued on with their journey to Egypt. However, as the group had made their way to what was seemingly an abandoned town, they at first thought that no one would be there. That was until they came across an elderly woman, one of whom wanted to offer them lodging and rest. She had a local inn nearby, and the group would go and take her up on her accommodations. However, little did they know that the one of whom was trying to help them, her name was Enya, and she was one of Dio's most loyal servants. You see, when Palmaref had killed Jagiel, he was actually the son of Enya, mourning the loss of her beloved son and wanting to seek revenge against this ragtag team of heroes. Enya had decided to take it upon herself to confront and destroy them personally, using her own stand, her stand known as justice. This concludes What If Captain America Was in Jojo's Bizarre Adventures, Dio's Revenge, Part 3. As always, if you're a fan of today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that's to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we begin One Piece, Rangers of the Sea, based on the Heroes of the Morphing Grid series, Part 1. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.